When the lawyer handed Wren Calloway an envelope with a single dollar inside, the room erupted into laughter. Her Uncle Dale was already smiling before the lawyer finished reading. His wife covered her mouth, but not enough to hide it. Wren sat in the back row in the only dark dress she owned and did not move. She had spent 3 years beside a hospital bed for this. A dollar bill in a room full of people who had never once shown up. The conference room sat on the fourth floor of a brick building in Albany, the kind of office with thick carpet and a long table polished until it looked wet. Whitfield, the family lawyer, was a heavy-set man in his 60s who read wills the way other men read grocery lists, flat and unbothered by what the words did to the people listening. He had already gone through the smaller bequests. 40,000 to the Lutheran Church on Route 9, 15,000 to the volunteer fire department that had once pulled Eleanor Calloway's car out of a ditch during an ice storm, an engraved pocket watch to a neighbor who had mowed her field for 20 years without being asked. Then came the larger items. The farmhouse on Linden Road, appraised at just under $900,000, to Dale Calloway, free and clear. The investment accounts at two different banks totaling $1,100,000 to Dale's son Tobias, with a trustee clause attached for the first 3 years. Tobias did not open his eyes when his name was read. He had the look of a man who had been drinking the night before and possibly the morning of. Whitfield turned a page. The paper made a small, dry sound in the quiet room. And to my granddaughter, Wren Calloway, currently residing in the apartment above Henley's Laundromat on Route 30, I leave the sum of $1 contained in the envelope handed to her at this reading. Dale laughed first. It came out of him fast, like something he had been holding for years and finally got to let go. His wife laughed behind her hand, quieter, but just as sharp. Tobias opened his eyes for the first time that morning and looked at Wren the way a man looks at roadkill he is mildly curious about, but does not intend to stop for. "Drink it in, farm girl," Dale said. He did not lower his voice. He wanted the room to hear it. Wren did not answer. She kept her hands folded over the envelope in her lap. She had practiced this face for 3 years, sitting in a vinyl chair beside a hospital bed, listening to machines breathe for a woman who could no longer breathe on her own. She had a steady face. It was the only thing the family had ever resented about her, because it never gave them anything to push against. Whitfield finished the remaining provisions in the same flat voice. A small annuity for the hospice nurse who had stayed past her shift more nights than she billed for. A clause excluding any contest of the will. A clause naming a separate executor for what it called private arrangements the testator may have left elsewhere. The word elsewhere caught in Wren's ear and stayed there. The meeting broke apart the way these things always did, in a scrape of chairs and a low murmur of people pretending to be solemn. Dale shook Whitfield's hand and clapped him once on the shoulder, the gesture of a man closing a sale. His wife collected her coat from the back of her chair without looking at anyone. Tobias walked past Wren on his way out, slowed just enough to lean down near her ear. "Don't spend it all in one place," he said. He smelled like last night's whiskey under a clean shirt, the smell of a man trying to cover one mistake with another. Wren looked at him and said nothing. After a moment, he straightened up, made a face she could not read, and walked out through the stairwell instead of waiting for the elevator with his parents. Wren walked out of the building alone, the envelope in her right hand, her bag over her left shoulder. She took the bus home because the bus was $4, and she did not yet know what the dollar in her pocket was worth. The window beside her seat was streaked with old rain. She watched the gray fields slide past and thought about February, when the pain had gotten bad and the hospice nurse had set up the morphine pump and explained the dosing in a voice that tried too hard to be gentle. Eleanor had been quiet most of that afternoon. Then, near 4:30, she had opened her eyes and looked at Wren the particular way she always did when she meant something exactly. "When someone knocks," Eleanor had said, "you answer the door." "Grandma, I always do. I mean a stranger, with a letter or a key or both. Promise me, I promise." That had been the last clear conversation. After that came 2 weeks of the slow leaving. The long mornings where Eleanor drifted somewhere Wren could not follow. One night a storm had moved through the valley, thunder rolling low over the hills, and Eleanor had opened her eyes and asked, "Is it raining at the forge?" Wren had not understood. She had said, "It's raining everywhere, Grandma. Sleep." Eleanor had nodded and closed her eyes and said nothing else that night. The bus let her off 2 blocks from Henley's Laundromat. She lived above it, in a single room she had moved into the week before her grandmother died, after Patricia had called to say the family needed the farmhouse cleared out for the appraisal. Wren had not argued. She rarely did. The move had taken 2 trips with a duffel bag that still had the airline tag from a flight she had never taken. A gift from a friend who thought she might someday leave the county. The room had one window over a fire escape, a hot plate, a small refrigerator that hummed louder than it cooled, a folding table, and a mattress on a metal frame. Downstairs, the laundromat sign flickered through the floorboards at night, a faint blue pulse against the ceiling. Wren set the envelope on the folding table and looked at it for a long time before she opened it. Inside was a single-dollar bill, crisp, new from the bank. Nothing else. She turned it over under the bare bulb that hung from the ceiling. In the margin, in handwriting she would have known anywhere, small and slanted and unmistakably her grandmother's, were 2 words. Trust her. Wren sat on the edge of the mattress with the bill in her hand. She did not cry. She had not cried at the funeral, and she had not cried in the lawyer's office. She had cried exactly once since her grandmother died, alone in the hospital chapel a week before, her face pressed into her own forearm so the chaplain would not hear her through the thin wall of his office. She read the 2 words again. Trust her. She did not know who her was. There was nothing else written on the bill, front or back. She set it down beside the envelope, made a cup of instant coffee she did not finish, and stood at the window until the laundromat sign below had blinked itself into a rhythm she stopped noticing. The knock came at 7 that evening. 3 soft taps, evenly spaced, the kind of knock that belonged to someone who had done this before and did not need to do it twice. Wren went to the door and looked through the peephole. A woman stood in the hallway, alone, in a long, dark coat, gray hair cut close to her head, steel-rimmed glasses, a leather portfolio held against her chest, like something she did not intend to set down until she had to. Wren opened the door. Miss Calloway, the woman said. My name is Cordelia Hartwell. I was your grandmother's private attorney for 38 years. I am not the man you met this morning. I am the other one. She paused. May I come in? Wren stepped back and let her in. Cordelia set her portfolio on the folding table beside the envelope and looked around the small room once, without judgment, the way a person looks at weather rather than a verdict. You can sit, Wren said. There's only the mattress. I'll stand, I won't be long. She opened the portfolio and took out a single envelope, thick, sealed with red wax pressed with the letter E. She held it out. Your grandmother asked me to bring you this tonight. She asked that you read it before morning. She asked that you be at the curb downstairs at 7 o'clock with a bag for 3 days and with the dollar bill she left you in your wallet. I will drive. It is about 3 hours north. Wren took the envelope. The wax was still faintly warm from the woman's coat pocket. 3 hours where? Why didn't you come to the office today? Because I was not invited, Cordelia said, and because what your grandmother asked me to handle is not a matter for her family's lawyer. He doesn't know about you. He doesn't know about any of this. There is no reason for him to know. Wren looked at the wax seal. It was clean, deep, pressed by a hand that had not hesitated. You're saying there's something else. I'm saying your grandmother loved you and that she trusted you to come to that curb tomorrow morning knowing nothing, on the strength of one sentence in her handwriting. What's the sentence? Wren asked. Cordelia's face did not change, but something behind her eyes warmed by a small, careful degree. Read the letter, she said. She left as quietly as she had come. Wren listened to her footsteps go down the stairs and out the front of the building. A car door opened and closed in the street below. The engine did not turn over for almost a minute, as though the woman had been waiting to be sure the door upstairs stayed shut. Wren sat at the folding table and broke the wax seal with her thumb. The handwriting inside was the same spidery, slanted hand that had written birthday cards and grocery lists for 21 years. My darling girl, the letter began. I am sorry for the cruelty you witnessed today. It was the last test I ever asked of you, and you passed it without knowing it was a test at all. If you are reading this, the dollar is in your hand, and the woman who delivered it is sitting in her car downstairs. And you are, I imagine, at a small table in a small room above a laundromat, because my son's wife arranged for you to be moved out before I was even cold. I knew about that room. I knew about all of it. I never said anything because I was waiting for the right time, and the right time was not while I was dying. The right time is now. The dollar is not your inheritance. The dollar is the receipt for it. I am leaving you something the rest of them will never find, and would not understand if they did. I am leaving it because you sat with me, because you read to me from the books Dale called sentimental nonsense, because you held my feet when they were cold, and you did not flinch when the smell in that room got bad, and you did not look at the clock while I was talking, because the only thing worth leaving anyone is the chance to become useful, and money has never once made a person useful. Cordelia will drive you. Bring the dollar. Bring 3 days of clothes. Bring nothing else. You will not need anything else. There are things you cannot pack that will be given to you when you arrive. There are people waiting for me to come back. I am not coming back. They do not know that yet. You will tell them. You will do it gently. You will sit with them the way you sat with me. I needed to know you could keep a secret you did not know you were keeping. I needed to know the laughter in that room would not break you. I love you. I have always loved you. The way a grandmother loves the only good thing left of a son who broke her heart long before he ever broke yours. Trust her. It was signed with a single capital E. Wren read the letter twice. She folded it carefully along the creases Cordelia had already pressed into the paper, slid it into her grandmother's old leather glasses case, and put the case under her pillow. At the window, she opened the sash and let the cold night air come up the fire escape. Below, the laundromat sign kept its slow blue rhythm. She thought of her grandmother in February, the promise, the slow leaving, the thunderstorm. Is it raining at the forge? The phrase had made no sense that night. It was beginning to now. The duffel bag came down from the closet shelf. 3 days of clothes, a toothbrush, the enamel-handled hairbrush Eleanor had given her on her 16th birthday, the leather glasses case with the letter inside. The bag went by the door. The alarm was set for 6. Sometime past midnight, she got up, took the dollar bill from the table and slid it carefully into her wallet behind her library card. Then back to bed, eyes open, until the room finally let her sleep. 3 hours north of where Wren lay, lights were going out in 12 small cottages, one by one. A dog who had not eaten properly in 8 days lay at the foot of a bed no one had slept in for nearly 2 weeks, waiting for someone she had not yet met. At 6 minutes to 7, Wren stood at the curb with her bag at her feet. A station wagon was already parked across the street, engine idling low, exhaust rising pale in the cold morning air. It was an old car, dark green, the paint waxed to a glow that suggested someone had loved it longer than reason allowed. Cordelia stepped out and stood beside the open driver's door. "Good morning, Miss Calloway." "Just Wren." "All right, just Wren. Bag in the back." The trunk held a folded wool blanket, a thermos, and a paper bag of pastries from a bakery Wren didn't recognize. Cordelia caught her looking. "It's a long drive. There's coffee. The pastries are from a place near my office. You don't have to eat them. They keep." Wren set her bag inside and walked around to the passenger door. The leather seat was worn smooth in places that told her exactly where 2 hands had rested for decades. The dashboard had old square instruments and wood trim polished by years of palms. "This car," Wren said, "it was a gift from her. 1986, the year she paid me my first retainer. I've kept it on the road ever since. Buckle up." They pulled away from the curb and turned north. The early commute traffic thinned as the road climbed, the trees along the parkway bare and gray, not yet ready for spring. Cordelia drove the way someone drives a road they have memorized, one hand loose on the wheel, never rushing, never slowing more than the curve required. "You can ask me anything," Cordelia said, after the first half hour had passed in silence. "I am the only person alive who can answer most of it." Wren took a moment. "Why did she do it that way yesterday?" "You mean the dollar?" "Yes." Cordelia nodded once at the road ahead. "Your grandmother had a sharp eye for character. Most people lose that eye as they get older. She kept hers. She wanted to know if you could sit in that room and not break, whether you would walk out without slamming a door, whether Dale had managed to grind you down in the years he tried, or whether you were still made of what she believed you were made of. And if I had argued, then you would not be in this car. If I had cried, she allowed for crying. She did not allow for begging. What about laughing back, saying something cruel?" The corner of Cordelia's mouth moved, just slightly. She allowed for that, too. "Your grandmother knew the difference between sharp and cruel. Sharp is fine. Cruel disqualifies." Wren watched a hawk drift low over a brown field. "She told you all of this." "She told me all of this many times over many years. I have known your grandmother since I was 31 years old. I am 69 now. I knew her longer than you did, and not nearly as well. Something she would have laughed at me for admitting. They passed through small towns Wren had never heard of, gas stations and diners with chalkboard signs advertising pie, the road narrowing as the hills thickened around them. Why didn't she tell me herself, Wren asked. Because the test depended on you not knowing. If you had known there was something else waiting, you would not have been the same girl in the back row of that office. You would have been a girl with a secret. People can smell that. Your uncle, of all people, can smell that. She wanted you clean. She wanted you exactly what you were. You believe in this kind of thing. I believe in your grandmother, Cordelia said. I have written 100 wills in my career. None of them are like the one I will read to you this afternoon. She started it in 1985. She rewrote it 11 times. The last revision was 4 months ago, at her kitchen table, with both of us sitting there and you asleep upstairs. Wren thought of that kitchen, the maple table, her grandmother in her quilted robe, the one with the burn mark near the collar from a stove she'd had since before Wren was born. What's the place called? Cobalt Hollow. I never heard her say the name, not directly. You heard her say it the night of the storm. You just didn't know that's what she meant. They came off the highway at an exit Wren would never have noticed driving past it on her own, onto a county road through farmland. Low rolling fields divided by old stone walls, the occasional silo standing gray against the sky. They passed a town 2 blocks long, a gas station, a hardware store, a diner with a hand-lettered sign in the window. Cordelia did not slow. She turned at the second light past the town and started up a long hill. The road narrowed further, then turned to gravel beneath the tires. Almost there, Cordelia said. They came through a stand of bare woods and out at the top of a rise. Below them, a shallow valley opened out, brown and waiting, patches of new green starting to show where the grass had begun to remember spring. A creek wound through the bottom of it. On the right, a wooden sign weathered to silver read Cobalt Hollow, and beneath it, smaller, property of EC. Cordelia turned in. The drive ran a quarter mile through a stand of bare apple trees before opening onto the cluster of buildings Wren would come to know by heart. 12 small white cottages with green metal roofs stood arranged in a loose horseshoe around a central green. At the center of the green sat a chapel no bigger than a one-room schoolhouse with a small bell tower. Behind it, on slightly higher ground, a larger house with a wide porch faced the valley. To the left, a barn with 2 horses standing in the yard. To the right, a kitchen garden, beds turned and waiting for planting, and a row of beehives painted slate blue. Off to one side, half hidden by a stand of pines, stood a low stone building with a chimney that had not smoked in years. Wren did not yet know what it was. Cordelia pulled up in front of the porch house and put the car in park. The quiet that settled in afterward was the kind you only find where there are no highways for many miles. "Welcome home," she said. Wren did not move at first. She watched the porch. The screen door opened, and a woman in coveralls and a worn fleece jacket stepped out, wiping her hands on a rag. She looked to be in her early 30s, dark hair pulled back, a streak of grease across one cheekbone. Behind her, slowly, came an elderly woman in a wheelchair, pushed by a younger aide. The elderly woman wore a cardigan the color of butter and had a quilt across her lap, white hair braided down her back. A dog came around the corner of the porch ahead of all of them, a medium-sized shepherd mix, gray at the muzzle, who came down the steps without hurrying and walked straight to the passenger door and sat. "That's Juniper," the woman in coveralls said. "She knew you were coming about a minute before the car turned in." "How?" Wren asked. "Don't know. She always did with your grandmother, too." Wren got out and knelt on the gravel. The dog leaned the side of her head against Wren's knee and stayed there, and Wren put her hand on the rough, warm fur and did not move for a long moment. The wheelchair stopped at the top of the porch steps. The elderly woman looked down, her eyes a faded blue, sharp in the corners. "You're Wren." "Yes, ma'am. Come up here. Let me look at you." "Me." Wren climbed the steps, Juniper at her heel. The woman reached out and took Wren's hand between both of hers. Her hands were thin, warm, dry as paper. "She talked about you every single day," the woman said. "Every day for 3 years. Every visit. Every letter. You should know that before anyone tells you anything else." Wren could not speak. "My name is Mabel," the woman said. "Don't worry about my last name yet. Your grandmother gave me your school photo every year. The one from 3rd grade is still on my windowsill. The gap in your front teeth. I remember losing that tooth." "Good," Mabel said, and squeezed her hand once more. Then you already know me a little. Inside, the woman in coveralls introduced herself as Selena, the property's manager, and put Wren's bag inside the door of a cottage Wren did not yet know was her grandmother's. The porch house kitchen had a long pine table, a wood stove glowing in the corner, and a pot of soup simmering on a six-burner range that looked older than Wren was. 3 loaves of bread cooled under a cloth. A jar of honey sat beside a wooden dipper. You should eat before we walk the property, Selena said. Eleanor always said meetings on an empty stomach end in bad decisions. She got that from her own grandmother, Mabel said. Who got it from hers? Wren sat. Soup came and bread and honey passed hand to hand. Juniper lay down under the table against Wren's feet. While she ate, they did not speak of the inheritance. Selena told her about the horses. Mabel told her about the hives. Cordelia told her about the gravel road and how it iced over every February, and how Eleanor had once gotten stuck on it for 6 hours during a storm and walked the last 2 miles in city boots, arriving frozen and furious and laughing at the same time. After the soup, Selena walked her through the property. They started at the chapel. It was small and plain inside. 6 wooden pews, a low pulpit, a wood stove in the corner. The walls had been painted pale yellow many years ago and had softened to cream. There were no crosses anywhere. A small frame print of a goldfinch on a thistle hung above the pulpit. Eleanor didn't care much for religion, Selena said, but she liked Sundays. The chapel is for Sundays. We do a potluck. Whoever can come, comes. Someone reads something. Doesn't have to be scripture. Usually isn't. They walked the horseshoe of cottages, and Selena named the residents as they passed. The elderly couple in Cottage 1, married 53 years, who had come 2 summers ago after their children sold the family farmhouse without telling them first. The man in Cottage 2, a retired railroad mechanic named Earl, who had not heard from his son in 4 years and fixed everything on the property that had a moving part. The retired piano teacher in Cottage 3, who had come after her sister died and her sister's husband would not let her back into the apartment for her things. Cottage 4 stood empty. The retired nun in Cottage 5, 84 years old, who had lost her pension when her order dissolved and played the violin badly every evening at the same hour. The retired postal carrier in Cottage 6, 41 years on the same route, whose daughter had left him at the gate and never come back. The retired pediatrician in Cottage 7, a woman named Mrs. Okonkwo, who was having a hard time some mornings and good days most of the rest. What is it? Wren asked. They told us early onset memory loss, Selena said. We think it's been longer than that. Maybe 10 years, slow. They went on past the widow in Cottage 8, who had taught 3rd grade for 35 years, the retired metalworker in Cottage 9, the retired waitress in Cottage 10, very small, very fierce, who had once worked a diner counter for 40 years and still moved like she was carrying 4 plates at once. Cottage 11 belonged to Selena. Cottage 12 held a retired high school custodian who repaired clocks as a hobby and had fixed every clock on the property within a month of arriving. We have 10 residents right now, Selena said. We've had as many as 14 using the bunk rooms in the porch house. We're trying not to go back to that. People in their 80s and 90s need their own door. The barn came next, 2 retired riding school horses who came eagerly to the feed bucket. Then the kitchen garden, the orchard, the path running down toward the creek where the woods began. This is 28 acres of working land, Selena said. The full property is 280. Most of it is woods. We sell some firewood in the fall to the diner in town. We rent a back meadow to a local farmer for almost nothing, mostly so he keeps it cut. There's a small farm store at the gate that's been closed since Eleanor stopped coming up here herself. Honey and eggs and whatever the residents make in the winter. As they came back around past the stand of pines, Wren slowed at the low stone building with the cold chimney. What's that one? She asked. Selena followed her gaze. That was your great-grandfather's forge, she said. Eleanor's father built it back in the 50s. Nobody's lit that fire in years. Your grandmother used to go in there sometimes, alone and just sit. Never told us why. Wren said nothing, but something in her chest shifted, the way a key turns half a notch before it finds the lock. By the time they returned to the porch house, the afternoon light had gone gold. In the small cottage that had been Eleanor's, Cordelia spread documents across the kitchen table. Selena sat on the windowsill. Mabel was wheeled in and parked at the head of the table. This is the actual will, Cordelia said in the same calm, unhurried tone she had used the entire drive. Your grandmother executed it 3 years ago and revised it 4 months ago. The trust holding this property is called the Cobalt Hollow Trust. You are the sole surviving beneficiary and the sole director. Wren listened. The legal language was not difficult. The terms were not what she had expected. The trust holds title to the 280 acres, the buildings, and the equipment, Cordelia said. It holds a brokerage account currently valued at $3,640,000. Annual income from that account at current rates is roughly $180,000. Selena caught Wren's eye and gave her a small nod. Annual operating cost is closer to $620,000, Cordelia continued. The trust principal can be drawn on to cover the shortfall. Wren did the math in her head, the way she had once done it balancing her grandmother's checkbook at the farmhouse kitchen table. Less than 7 years, she said. She knew the math, Cordelia said. She wanted you to know it too. There is also a condition. You serve as director for at least 1 full year before any decision to sell, restructure, or close anything. After 1 year, you may do as you wish. And if I leave now, then Selena manages it until the money runs out and the residents are placed wherever the county can put them. Mabel has a niece in Vermont who might take her. Mrs. Okonkwo would go to a sister who is also unwell. The couple in Cottage 1 have nowhere. Earl has nowhere. We have asked around. There is nowhere. The cottage went very quiet. Juniper lay across Wren's feet, a warm, solid weight. How long do I have to decide? Wren asked. You're under no obligation to start today, Cordelia said. You can sign now. You can sign tomorrow morning. You can drive back tonight and never sign at all. Wren looked at Mabel. Mabel did not say anything. She only watched Wren's face, the same way she had watched it from the porch when the car first turned in. I need a minute, Wren said. Take all the minutes you need, Mabel said. We've learned how to wait here. Wren stood. Juniper stood with her. Together they walked out of the cottage and down the 2 steps onto the gravel path. The light over the valley had gone lavender at the horizon, gold along the tops of the woods. Lamps were beginning to come on in the cottage windows, small warm squares against the cooling purple field. From Cottage 5 came the slow, scratchy beginning of a violin, an old hymn played with more sincerity than skill. Wren walked the path between the cottages, Juniper at her heel, past the chapel, and sat down on a bench beneath an old oak near the bell tower. Her hand rested on the dog's head. Her eyes closed. In her mind, she heard her grandmother's voice from that February night. Is it raining at the forge? The violin in Cottage 5 reached a note it could not quite hold, broke, and started again. Juniper leaned her weight gently against Wren's leg. When Wren finally opened her eyes, she looked at the lit windows for a long time. She did not yet know what she would say when she walked back inside. She only knew that the dollar bill in her wallet, folded behind her library card, had a weight now that it had not had that morning, and that the weight was not light, and that she had no intention of setting it down. Wren walked back inside with Juniper at her heel and stood at the kitchen table. Cordelia was pouring tea from a battered brown pot. Selena waited at the windowsill. Mabel sat with her hands folded in her lap, watching the door. 3 months, Wren said. I'll give it 3 months. Then we talk again about whether I stay the full year. Cordelia set the teapot down, closed her eyes for half a second, and opened them again. Selena let out a breath she had clearly been holding since the porch. 3 months is enough to know, Mabel said. Most of us only needed a week. But 3 is fair. I want to learn what she built, Wren said. All of it. The land, the cottages, the money. Then I want to know if the math can be made to work. That's exactly the conversation we've been needing for 2 years, Selena said. Cordelia slid the director's paperwork across the table. Wren signed where her grandmother's lawyer indicated, and her signature came out steadier than she expected. Juniper watched from beneath the table, tail thumping once against the floorboards. You sleep here tonight, Mabel said. In your grandmother's bed. The sheets were changed this morning. There's a hot water bottle in the linen press. That first night, Wren lay in her grandmother's bed and listened to a place she had never known, but had somehow been chosen for. Wind moved through the bare apple trees behind the cottage. Juniper settled at the foot of the bed without being asked. From Cottage 2 came the low murmur of a television tuned to a ball game somewhere far away. From Cottage 1, an old man's slow cough, followed by his wife saying his name twice. The lamp in Cottage 7 stayed lit the entire night. Wren could see its pale square against the curtain when she finally closed her eyes. She woke before dawn. In the dim kitchen, she made coffee in her grandmother's enamel pot and stood at the window, watching the valley turn from gray to pink. There was a leather journal on a shelf above the stove. She took it down. The first page bore a date in 1985, the year Eleanor bought the original 40 acres, with a small hand-drawn map beneath it. The following pages held household accounts, a recipe for cornbread, a list of names with arrival dates beside them. The first name on the list was Mabel's. Selena knocked at 7, already in her coveralls, a thermos in one hand. "You up?" "Good. I'll show you the morning round." The morning round had belonged to Eleanor before it belonged to Selena. Each cottage got a knock and a check-in. Nothing elaborate. A nod through the door, sometimes a sentence, sometimes coffee carried in. The point was to know who was up, who was eating, who was foggy that morning, who would need the visiting doctor when she came through on Thursdays. Earl in Cottage 2 was already up at 5, rebuilding the carburetor on a generator at a workbench he had built into his own glassed-in porch. He looked up when Wren appeared and nodded once. "She used to bring me a hard-boiled egg," he said. Wren made him one in his own pot and set it on the workbench. He nodded again. He did not say thank you. He did not need to. The retired nun in Cottage 5 answered her door with her violin already tucked beneath her chin. "Forgive the noise from last night," she said. "I can't hear myself well anymore. Selena tells me I sound like a goose having a bad day." "It was a good goose," Wren said, and the old woman laughed for the first time since Wren had arrived. The married couple in Cottage 1 sat at their small table, the husband shaving at the sink with a straight razor, his wife pouring tea. They had been married 53 years and held hands during the introduction. Mrs. Okonkwo in Cottage 7 was not awake yet. Selena stood at the door and listened for a long moment, then nodded, and they moved on. "She wakes around 10 on the harder days," Selena said quietly on the path. "We don't push her. The visiting doctor comes Thursdays. We're looking for a memory care aide. They're not easy to find for what we can pay out here." By mid-morning, Wren had met every resident on the property and remembered all but 2 of their names. The widow in Cottage 8, who had taught 3rd grade for 35 years, hugged Wren at the door and said, "You're as steady as she always said you'd be. Bless you, child." The first week settled into a shape. Breakfast in the porch house for whoever wanted to come over. Lunch at 1, a quiet hour after, mail at 2 from the rural route. Dinner at 6, always at the porch house, family style. After dinner, the chapel stood open for anyone who wanted to sit in it. Sundays brought the potluck and a reader chosen at random. On the 3rd afternoon, Selena showed her the books. 3 leather ledgers and a laptop running a simple accounting program Eleanor had insisted on installing years earlier. "Monthly burn is $52,000 and change," Selena said, turning the laptop so Wren could see. "Heating pushes it higher in winter. Property tax once a year, $28,000. Insurance, $34,000. 2 part-time nurses, 3 full-time aides, the cook, the housekeeper. Medications. The visiting doctor takes a flat $800 a week whether one person sees her or 8. We pay a man to cut hay, a firewood crew, a roofer, a plumber on retainer. We replace 1 furnace every 2 years on rotation." Wren listened without interrupting. She had a mind for numbers, sharpened from years of balancing her grandmother's checkbook on the kitchen table back home. "Annual income from the trust principal is $180,000, Selena went on. "Donations last year, $14,000. The farm store, when it was open, brought in about $9,000. We're short $380,000 a year. We draw it from the principal. The principal keeps the lights on for 7 years if nothing changes. 5 if a major repair lands wrong. Less than that if the building inspector finds something on the chapel roof he doesn't like." "What did she think the answer was?" Wren asked. "She thought there were 3 answers," Selena said. "A real fundraising operation, which we don't have. A state grant program for rural elder care, which she'd started the paperwork on, half finished. And restructuring the trust to take restricted donations from foundations, which the current language won't allow. Cordelia knows that part. How long was she working on this before she got sick?" 6 years, on and off. Then she got sick and stopped. Then she got sicker and never started again. Wren looked at the ledger, at the dates on the half-finished grant application, and felt the back of her neck go warm. The shape of what she had inherited was clearer now. It was not a gift, it was a task, and the deadline had been written by a woman who was no longer there to meet it. That evening, on her way back from the barn, Wren stopped again at the low stone building near the pines. The door was unlocked, swollen with damp, and gave way with a low groan. Inside, the forge sat cold and dark, a stone hearth built into one wall, an anvil mounted on a worn wooden stump, tools hanging in rows along the far wall, each one in its own outline burned or painted into the wood behind it. Dust lay thick over everything, except for a single workbench near the window, where the dust had been disturbed more recently than the rest. On that bench sat a tin box. Inside it, wrapped in oilcloth, was a notebook far older than the journal in the kitchen. The handwriting inside was not Eleanor's. It was rougher, more deliberate, the hand of a man teaching himself to write something down so it would not be lost. Diagrams of blade angles, notes on heat color, on tempering times, on the particular ring a piece of steel makes when it's ready and the duller sound it makes when it isn't. At the back of the notebook, in Eleanor's own slanted hand, added decades later in different ink, was a single line. If she ever finds this, let her decide what it's worth. Wren sat on the workbench stool for a long time, the cold forge in front of her, the notebook open on her knees, and did not yet understand what she was looking at, only that it mattered, the way a key matters before you know which door it opens. She told no one that night. She put the notebook back in its tin box and walked back to the cottage in the dark, Juniper trotting ahead of her, the lamp in Cottage 7 still burning behind its curtain. 2 weeks in, on a Wednesday afternoon, the phone in Wren's pocket rang. Dale's name on the screen. She let it ring twice before answering. "Wren, what is going on?" His voice was tight, not yet angry, already cold underneath. "Hello, Uncle Dale. My lawyer just got off the phone with the county recorder upstate. There's a property in your name, a trust with your name on it, a registration showing a Cordelia Hartwell as attorney of record." "Who is Cordelia Hartwell?" "Grandma's other lawyer." "Don't be funny. There is no other lawyer." "There was the man this morning, Whitfield. I've known him 30 years. He handled everything." "There was another one." A pause on the line, his breathing audible. When his voice came back, it had dropped lower. "What did she leave you?" 280 acres, a trust fund of 3.6 million, a property with 12 cottages and 10 elderly residents who'll have nowhere to go if it shuts down. A longer pause. "She left 10 old people to a 21-year-old. She left 10 old people to a granddaughter she spent 3 years training to take care of an old person. This isn't legal." "It is. I've signed the director's paperwork. Cordelia has the file." "You think you're going to run a place like that?" "Wren, be reasonable. Sell it. Take half the principal as a stipend. Give me the rest and we move on. The other lawyer can be paid out. The residents can be placed. There's nowhere to place them. We've asked. Then we'll find somewhere. That's not your problem." "It is now." Dale was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice had gone soft in a way Wren had only ever heard him use on clients and on his wife. "You don't owe my mother this. She used you. Whatever speech she gave you, whatever she promised, she used you. Come back to town. We'll find you a room. Tobias can help you get set up. We're family. Goodbye, Uncle Dale." She ended the call before he could answer. He arrived 3 days later at 11 in the morning in a leased SUV with Patricia in the passenger seat and Tobias slumped in the back. Selena saw them from the kitchen window first and walked out the front of the porch house with Wren behind her. The SUV pulled up in nearly the same spot the station wagon had stopped 2.5 weeks earlier, the chassis already dusted with gravel, looking out of place against the green. Dale stepped out first in a dark wool coat. Patricia followed in a coat that had cost more than Selena's monthly food budget for the entire property. Tobias got out last, in jeans and a flannel jacket, his eyes not lifting until the door slammed behind him. "Wren," Dale said. He did not come any closer at first, standing by the open driver's door, his gaze moving over the cottages, the chapel, the barn, the hill beyond where the woods began. A calculation crossed his face, the same calculation Wren had watched him make at restaurants and funerals her entire life. "This is what she left you," he said. "Yes, this is what she never told anyone she had." "Yes." Patricia stayed half the step behind him, arms folded, looking at Selena and then at Juniper at Wren's feet. Her expression the same one she made when the soup at a restaurant was wrong. "I'd like to see it," Dale said, "if you'd walk me through." "You're my niece," he added when she didn't move. "My mother was my mother. There's a way here, whether you want there to be or not." Wren did not argue the point. She started the walk. At the chapel, Dale stood in the doorway and did not step inside. He looked at the goldfinch print above the pulpit. "Tax-exempt structure," he said. Was she using this for the deduction? She was using it for Sundays, Wren said. He walked the horseshoe of cottages the way a developer walks a parcel before a meeting, estimating square footage and lot lines, asking about easements. "Subdivide this into 5-acre parcels," he said. "You've got 56 lots, maybe 48 after wetlands, $500,000 each at the low end. The land's worth 8, maybe 10 million if you wait for the right market. The buildings are a problem. You'd want them down. They're not assets. They depreciate. Buyers want clean land." Wren stopped walking. "The cottages have people in them," she said. "That's a temporary condition." Earl came out of cottage 2 at that moment with a coffee mug and a wrench in hand. He nodded at Wren, looked once at Dale, and made a private face Wren had never seen on him before. He went back inside and closed the door. "Who's that?" Dale asked. "He worked for the railroad 39 years. He keeps everything mechanical on this property running. His son moved to Phoenix and stopped answering the phone 4 years ago." "Why is that my problem? He's one of 10 people." They passed cottage 3 and 4. At 5, the violin had already started for the morning. Dale winced. At 6, the postal carrier tipped his cap to Wren and looked through Dale like he wasn't there. At 7, Mrs. Okonkwo sat on her porch in a sweater Wren hadn't seen her wear before, watching a robin move through the apple tree behind the cottage. This was clearly one of her good mornings, her eyes dark and lucid. "Mrs. Okonkwo," Wren said gently, "I'd like you to meet my Uncle Dale. He's visiting today." Mrs. Okonkwo turned her face toward him. "Mr. Calloway," she said, "your mother was a good woman. I'm sorry for your loss. I'm sure you are too." Dale didn't answer for a moment. He nodded once, formally. "Thank you," he said. Mrs. Okonkwo looked back at Wren. "Tell the cook I'd like to come for lunch today, if it isn't too much trouble." "It isn't," Wren said. "I'll tell her." They walked on. Out of earshot, Dale exhaled. "All right," he said. "I see what's here. Sit down with me at that porch house. We'll talk." Cordelia's station wagon turned in through the gate just as they reached the porch steps. Wren had called her the moment the SUV pulled in. Cordelia climbed out and came up the path with her portfolio and did not greet Dale. She did not need to. At the porch house table, Cordelia laid out 3 documents. The trust itself, independent capacity assessments from 3 physicians, dated across the final 3 years of Eleanor's life. The signed amendments showing the most recent revision, 4 months before her death. "You'll want to read these," Cordelia said. "I'll wait." Dale read them. Patricia stood at the window with her back to the room. Tobias sat in a chair against the wall and looked at the floor between his feet. The cook came in once, saw the table, and went back out without a word. After 10 minutes, Dale folded his hands. "This is airtight," he said. "It is," Cordelia said. "She wrote it to be. I drafted what she dictated," Cordelia said. "She was a more careful client than 99% of the lawyers I know." Dale looked at Wren. "Then sell it," he said. "Right now. I'll get you a buyer in a week. We split the proceeds. You keep $3 million in cash. You go back to school. You finish a degree. You buy a small place of your own. You live a normal life. The residents go into county placements with a stipend we fund for 2 years out of the sale. Everyone is taken care of. The land becomes what it should have been to begin with." He believed what he was saying. Wren could see that on his face. It was not cruelty, not in his own mind. It was the only world he could imagine living in. She looked at him for a long moment. "You think this is land," she said. "You think this is money. It's neither. It's a promise. Promises don't pay your bills, Dale. This one did for 40 years, for people you don't know and wouldn't stop to look at on a sidewalk. It pays them by existing. That's what she built. That's what I'm keeping." Dale stood up. Patricia stood with him at the window. Tobias did not move from his chair against the wall. Then I'll fight this, Dale said. Capacity grounds. Undue influence. Whatever I can find. You'll lose, Cordelia said quietly. You'll lose because there's nothing to find. You'll spend money you don't have. I'd prefer, for everyone's sake, that you not do this, Wren said. Dale looked at Cordelia for a long moment, then at Wren. You took her from me, he said. No, Wren said. She just chose. He walked out. Patricia followed. The screen door banged twice behind them. The SUV reversed in a fast spray of gravel and turned out through the gate. Tobias did not get up. After a minute, he said, I was sleeping in my car last week. Walmart parking lot over in Jersey. Wren turned and looked at him. He cut me off in March, Tobias said. Some fight about an interest payment that wasn't even about interest. Lost the apartment in April. The job went last November. The drinking went sideways before that, if I'm honest. I came up here in his car today because he made me come. I didn't know any of this existed. He didn't know either. He thought he was coming to see what you stole. Tobias, I don't want anything from you. I just wanted to say that before I get back in that car. He stood. I'll wait outside. You'll figure out he forgot me in about 10 minutes and come back for me. He walked out the front door. Wren did not follow him for a long moment. Then she went out onto the porch. He stood at the bottom of the steps, hands in his pockets, looking at the chapel. She came down and stood beside him. You can stay, she said. What? Cottage 4 is empty. Cottage 11 is Selena's. 12 has the clock man. The porch house has a guest room. You can stay tonight. We'll figure out what comes next in the morning. He looked at her, started to say something, stopped. Your dad would have been 70 years old this October, he said finally. Did you know that? My brother, I'm so much like him and so much not like him, I can't tell which anymore. He swallowed. I'd like to stay tonight. I haven't slept in a bed in 7 weeks. She nodded, then stay. That night, the wind came up out of the northwest and rattled the bare apple branches against the cottage windows. Juniper woke Wren at 1:20 with one short, sharp, low sound from the foot of the bed. Wren sat up. The dog was already standing at the door. The cottage was warm. Outside, the wind was the only sound. Wren pulled her coat on over her pajamas and her boots over bare feet. She opened the door. The night air was cold but not freezing. Juniper was already 3 steps down the path, ears up, looking toward Cottage 7. The Cottage 7 porch light was on. The door stood open. Wren ran. The cottage was empty. The bed was empty, blankets thrown back. Mrs. Okonkwo's shoes still sat by the door. She had walked out in her slippers. Wren ran across the path to the porch house. Juniper ran the other way, toward the lower gate. Wren woke Selena by pounding on her cottage door. Selena came out within 60 seconds, already in boots and a parka, a lantern in hand. Tobias came out of the porch house guest room 2 minutes later, eyes red, still in the same flannel jacket, asking what was happening. Mrs. Okonkwo is out. Cottage 7, slippers. Juniper's already gone after her. Go with her, Wren said. Tobias grabbed a lantern off the hook by the porch door and did not ask another question. He went. It took just under an hour to find her. Juniper led them, coming back twice along the lower meadow road to wait for them to catch up before going on again. They followed her down a rutted track through the orchard, past the kitchen garden, past the back fence, into the strip of woods that ran along the creek. The creek was running high from the spring melt, its noise filling the trees. Mrs. Okonkwo sat on a fallen log on the bank, hands folded in her lap, the same posture and composure she had shown on her porch that morning. She wore her nightgown, her slippers, and the sweater she had never put on the night before. Her hair had come loose from its braid. She was shivering. She was not crying. Mrs. Okonkwo, Wren said, dropping to her knees on the log. It's Wren, sweetheart. We're going to take you home. I was looking for my son, Mrs. Okonkwo said. He's supposed to come get me. I'm late. He'll know to find you at home, Wren said. Let's go home, get warm, and call him. Tobias was already pulling off his flannel jacket. He wrapped it around her shoulders. Selena knelt on her other side and took her hands, rubbing them between her own. "Can you walk, sweetheart?" Selena asked, "if we both hold you?" "Of course I can walk," Mrs. Okonkwo said, her voice clear and a little annoyed. "Don't be ridiculous." She made it 20 feet up the slope before her legs gave way. Tobias caught her before she fell and lifted her without a word, carrying her the half-mile back to the porch house. Selena walked beside him with the lantern. Wren and Juniper went ahead to put the kettle on and call the visiting doctor. By the time the doctor arrived in her Subaru at 4:15, Mrs. Okonkwo was wrapped in 3 blankets in a kitchen chair, a mug of warm milk in her hands, a heating pad at her feet. Her shivering had stopped. She remembered Wren's name and forgot Tobias's, remembered Selena's, and asked twice when her son was coming. "Mild hypothermia," the doctor said after checking her over. "No frostbite, no fall. Her blood pressure is alarmingly steady." She got lucky. Half a mile farther, and that creek would have had her. The doctor left at 6 in the gray light of early dawn after a long, quiet conversation with Wren and Selena at the porch table about what they were going to do about wandering and memory care. "Not the county facility," she said. "A small unit on this property. 2 aides on rotation. Alarm doors." She named a figure. It was large. It was not impossible. After she left, Wren went out onto the porch with her coffee. The sun was coming up over the woods at the back of the property. Tobias was already on the steps with a coffee of his own, eyes red, clearly having not slept. "I want to help," he said. "With what?" "All of it. I know I'm a mess. I know I'm not who you'd ask, but I worked at a finance firm for 2 years before the drinking blew it up. Junior analyst. I know trust restructuring. I've done grant applications. I've written board presentations. I can read a balance sheet. If you let me sit at that table with you and Selena for 60 days, I can give you back something useful. After that, if I'm still useless, I leave." Wren drank her coffee. Juniper's tail thumped once against the porch boards. "You'll get cottage 4, she said. "You'll pay rent and work. You'll go to the meeting in town on Tuesdays, the one in the church basement. You start tonight." He looked away, then nodded. "Tonight, 60 days. Then we talk again." He held out his hand. She did not shake it. She put her hand on his shoulder and squeezed once, the way her grandmother used to do, and felt something settle into place that had nothing to do with money at all. A woman from the neighboring property came up the lane that same morning with a basket of cornbread and news that turned the rest of the week. Her name was Vesta, and she had been Eleanor's closest friend for nearly 30 years. She had seen the SUV leave at speed the day before, and the lights stay on in the porch house all night, and had finally asked her son-in-law to drive her down to see what had happened. When she heard about Mrs. Okonkwo, she sat down at the porch table and said Eleanor had been working on this exact problem before she died. "She told me in February she had 2 leads," Vesta said. "I've had one in my coat pocket since the funeral, hoping someone would call me." She pulled a folded printout from her coat. "A state grant for rural elder care, due in 11 weeks. The other lead was a county program for in-home medical visits that could cut the visiting doctor's costs by a third." Wren, Tobias, and Selena sat at the porch table with the morning sun crossing the floor. Juniper lay under Wren's chair. Vesta poured herself a coffee. The grant printout sat in the middle of the table. The chalkboard above the kitchen sink still read "Grant due, 14 weeks, restart store." Tobias looked at the printout, then at Wren, and picked up a pen. "All right," he said. "Where do we start?" They were 11 weeks out from a grant deadline, 3 weeks from a quarterly trust payment that would land them right at the edge of their winter heating fund, and 1 wandering resident away from a county social worker calling the state about a duty of care complaint. Tobias wrote those 3 things at the top of a legal pad and underlined the third one twice. Behind them, through the kitchen window, the cold forge stood waiting near the pines, its chimney still and silent, holding a secret none of them yet understood. But one Wren had already begun, without quite admitting it to herself, to carry the weight of. Selena made fresh coffee, and they worked at the table until lunch, then again from 2 until dark, and again the next morning. By the second week, the grant draft had grown to 40 pages of narrative and 90 pages of attachments. Selena knew the operational answers. Tobias knew how to phrase the financial questions. Wren knew the residents. Vesta knew the language of state agencies, having served on a school board for 16 years. The four of them split the writing and read each other's drafts every evening, rewriting them again every morning. Mabel listened from her wheelchair when she had the strength for it. "You're starting to sound like her," she told them once, the way she used to put a sentence together when she was working a problem. None of them needed to ask who she meant. In the evenings, when the others had gone to their cottages, Wren found herself walking past the forge. She did not always go in. Some nights she only stood at the door and looked at the dark shape of the anvil through the cobwebbed window. Other nights she sat on the workbench stool with the old notebook open on her knees, reading the diagrams of blade angles, the notes on heat color, the line about the particular ring of steel when it was ready, and the duller sound when it wasn't. She did not know why it mattered to her as much as it did. She only knew that something in those pages felt like a hand reaching back through decades, offering her something none of the lawyers or ledgers could. On a Thursday afternoon in the third week, she asked Mabel about it directly. They sat together on the porch, the wheelchair turned toward the valley, a quilt across Mabel's lap. "I found the forge," Wren said. "There's a notebook in there, older than Grandma's own writing, some kind of family recipe for blacksmithing." Mabel was quiet for a long moment, her eyes on the tree line. "That was her father's," she said finally. "Built that forge with his own hands in 1953, back when this whole valley still had working farms that needed their own tools made and mended." Eleanor grew up watching him work that fire. She used to say the sound of the hammer was the first music she ever loved. "Why didn't she ever use it herself?" Wren asked. "As an adult." Mabel's mouth tightened, just slightly. "She did," she said. "Not the way you might think. About 8 years back, when the trust was first running thin. Before you ever knew this place existed, Eleanor went out there one winter and lit that fire for the first time in decades. Taught herself again from her father's notes. Made knives, good ones. Sold them quiet, through a man 2 counties over who deals in handmade tools for collectors. Made just enough, a few seasons running, to cover a hole in the budget that would have sunk us otherwise." "Why did she stop?" Wren asked. "Because Dale found out," Mabel said. "Not the forge itself, not exactly. He found a wire transfer he didn't recognize and got curious the way Dale gets curious, which is to say he smelled money he hadn't been told about. Eleanor was terrified he'd come up here, see what she had, and try to turn it into something it was never meant to be. A factory, a brand, a line of products with somebody else's name stamped on the blade. She let the fire go cold rather than let that happen. Told me once it broke her heart worse than almost anything else she gave up in her life." Wren sat with that for a long while, watching the light change over the valley. "She kept the notebook, though," Wren said. "She kept everything that mattered," Mabel said. "She just got very good, near the end, at deciding who got to find it." That night, Wren did not sleep much. She lay in her grandmother's bed with Juniper's weight warm against her feet and thought about a woman willing to let a fire go cold to protect 10 people she loved from a son who would have turned their survival into a product line. She thought about the dollar bill, the 2 words in the margin, "Trust her." She wondered, not for the first time, whether the her in that sentence had ever fully meant herself, or whether it had always, quietly, meant Wren. The grant deadline pulled closer. In the 5th week on a Saturday morning, they opened the farm store at the gate for the first time in over a year. The retired nun's loom had produced 6 scarves over the winter, slate gray and deep red, and they hung them from a wooden rod above the counter. Earl fixed the broken latch on the front door without being asked. The clock repairman in Cottage 12 restored an old wall clock he found in a back closet, and it began keeping time again for the first time in a decade. The widow from Cottage 8, who had taught 3rd grade for 35 years, volunteered to run the register on Saturdays. Honey from the slate blue hives, eggs from the porch house chickens, soap the residents made on Tuesday afternoons in the porch house kitchen, using goat's milk from Vesta's son-in-law down the road. A handwritten sign above the register read, "Pay what you can." The first Saturday they took in $240, the second $312. By the 4th it was over $800. People drove out from town and from smaller towns up the river when word started to spread, because the cornbread was good, because the scarves were beautiful, because the widow at the register smiled at them like they were her own grandchildren, and because the whole place felt, for the first time in a long while, like somewhere worth the drive. In the seventh week, the state grant office wrote back with 3 follow-up questions about how the property would document its outcomes. Tobias wrote a 5-page response over 2 long afternoons, his handwriting steady, no sign of the man who had once cut himself off in March over an argument that was never really about interest. Cordelia drove up that Friday and read the whole submission at the porch table while drinking the strongest tea any of them had ever watched her make. She set the last page down at 4:30 and looked at Tobias. "Your grandmother would be eating a slice of pie right now," she said, "while making fun of you for being good at this. I want you to know that." Tobias ducked his head and didn't answer for a long moment. "Yes, ma'am," he finally said. That same week, Wren stood at the forge again, this time not alone. She had asked Earl, the only resident left on the property who had ever worked metal with his own hands, to come with her. He looked the place over slowly, ran a hand along the cold anvil, and nodded once. "You want to try lighting it?" he said. Not a question. "Yes," Wren said. He helped her clean the flue, clear the old ash, lay the first careful bed of coal. It took 2 attempts before the fire caught properly, the old chimney coughing its first smoke into the sky above the pines in years. Earl watched the flame find its rhythm and nodded again, satisfied. "She'd be glad," he said, "letting it sit cold all this time. Some things in this world aren't meant to stay quiet forever." Wren did not tell him about Dale, about the secret her grandmother had buried alongside the fire. She only thanked him and stood there a long while, watching the coals glow orange in the dim stone room, feeling something in her chest that was not quite grief and not quite hope, but close to both. It was Selena who found the second secret 3 weeks later, going through the porch house ledgers in search of a missing receipt. Tucked behind a stack of old tax records was a folder neither Wren nor Cordelia had seen before, marked in Eleanor's hand simply, "Hollow Creek Bank, 2015. Cordelia drove up the next morning to look at it herself. She read through the documents twice at the kitchen table, her face unreadable in a way Wren had not seen from her before. "What is it?" Wren asked. "In 2015, Cordelia said slowly, "your grandmother took out a private mortgage against this property. Not through any bank you'd recognize. A small local institution 2 towns over, since absorbed into a larger one. She used it to cover a gap the trust couldn't close that year, after a bad harvest and an expensive roof repair landed in the same season. She never told me. I handled nearly everything for her, and she kept this from me." "How much?" Wren asked. $420,000, Cordelia said. "The terms were renewed twice, the most recent renewal 4 years ago." Cordelia turned the page slowly. "The balloon payment comes due in 90 days. If it isn't paid in full, the bank holding the note has the right to foreclose on this property." The kitchen went very quiet. Selena set down the mug she'd been holding without drinking from it. Tobias, who had been at the counter, turned around fully for the first time. 90 days, Wren repeated. Cordelia nodded. "I'll need to find out exactly who holds this note now, after the bank merger," she said. "These things get sold, packaged, passed along. It's possible whoever holds it today doesn't even know the full history of this place, or care to." "Can we extend it?" Wren asked. "Refinance it." "Possibly," Cordelia said, "but not without the trust showing a stronger income picture than it currently has, which means the grant, the store, all of it, just became more than a nice idea. It became the difference between keeping this property and losing it." Wren sat with that for a long moment, the cold weight of it settling beside the warmth she'd felt at the forge only weeks before. 2 truths sitting at the same table. Her grandmother had built something worth saving, and had also, in trying to save it once before, put it at risk in a way none of them had known to prepare for. That night, Wren walked to the forge alone. She did not light the fire. She only sat on the stool, the old notebook in her lap, and thought about her grandmother sitting in this same cold room 8 years earlier, quietly choosing to gamble the only thing she had left to protect 10 people who had nowhere else to go. She thought about Dale, somewhere in the city, certain that his mother had simply lost her sense near the end. She thought about how wrong he was, and how right he might end up being about the danger, even if he never understood the reason behind it. She did not tell Dale about the mortgage. She told Selena and Tobias, and together they decided the path forward had to run straight through the grant, the store, and now, the forge itself. Over the following weeks, Earl worked alongside Wren most evenings, teaching her what little he remembered from his own father's trade, which had more in common with blacksmithing than either of them expected. She made her first knife in the fourth week of trying, a clumsy thing with an uneven edge. And her second was better. And by the eighth attempt, she had made something Earl turned over in his hands for a long time before saying quietly, "That's a good knife." They sold the first three through the same contact 2 counties over that Eleanor had once used. A collector named Holt, who dealt in handmade tools and paid fairly for honest work. The money was small at first, a few $100s here and there, but it was money that had not existed in the ledger before, and Tobias entered each sale into the spreadsheet with something close to ceremony. A reporter from a regional paper came through in the ninth week, drawn by word of the reopened farm store, and ended up staying for nearly 3 hours, walking the property, talking with residents, watching Wren work the forge under Earl's quiet instruction. The piece that ran 2 Sundays later was 400 words long, accompanied by a photograph of Wren at the anvil, sparks caught mid-fall in the frame, juniper lying just outside the photograph's edge. Donations began arriving within days, small ones at first, $50 from a retired teacher upstate, 200 from a young couple who had read the piece over breakfast. Then unexpectedly, $10,000 from a woman in the city who had once served alongside Eleanor on a hospital charity board decades earlier and had been looking, she wrote in the accompanying letter, for somewhere to leave money that wouldn't disappear into administration. It was not enough on its own to cover the balloon payment, but it was enough to change the conversation Cordelia would soon need to have with whoever now held the note. In the 11th week, the grant office called to say the application had advanced to final review. In the same week, Mrs. Okonkwo had 3 difficult days in a row, days when she did not recognize Selena and called out for her son in a voice that frightened everyone within hearing. On the 4th day, she woke clear-eyed and lucid, ate breakfast at the porch table, and told Wren a long, detailed story about her first week as a young doctor, 50 years earlier, that none of them had ever heard before. "It comes and goes like weather," the visiting doctor told Wren afterward on the porch steps. "You'll learn to read the sky a little, but you'll never fully predict it. That's not a failure on your part. That's just what this is." Dale called twice more during those weeks. The first call was brief and businesslike, his lawyer's voice rehearsed and careful, informing Wren that he intended to file a formal challenge to the will on grounds of diminished capacity. The second call came 9 days later, at 9 at night, and his voice was different, looser, the words coming out in a long, unsteady slur. He told her he had lost the brokerage, that Patricia had left him for one of his own former clients, a man he had introduced her to at a fundraiser years before, that he was staying at a hotel near the airport because he could not stand to sleep in the empty house, that his mother had ruined him from the grave, and that Wren had helped her do it. Wren listened without interrupting. When he finally went quiet, she said, "When you're sober, come up. We have a cottage. We have work. You can sit at the table with your son. You can earn back what's yours to earn." He laughed, the same laugh from the lawyer's office months earlier, but smaller now, the meanness gone out of it, only the hurt left behind. "You don't owe me anything," he said. "I don't," she agreed. "I'm offering it anyway. There's a bed. The door's unlocked." He didn't answer. He hung up. Wren stood on the porch with the phone still in her hand for a long minute, watching the lamp in Cottage 7 and the lamp in Cottage 1 go dark, one after the other. Behind her, in the kitchen, she could hear Tobias and Selena laughing quietly at something. The doors, as her grandmother had always insisted, stayed open. Mabel's decline began slowly in the following weeks, not as a single collapse, but as a series of small surrenders. She stopped coming to dinner at the porch house on Tuesdays first, then on Thursdays, then any day at all, eating instead from a tray in her own cottage kitchen with her aide. She slept later each morning. She read fewer pages of her book each afternoon. Her visits with Wren, though, she kept faithfully, every day for an hour, asking always first about the grant and second about Selena's son, who had begun toddling around the porch house garden with increasing confidence. On what would turn out to be one of her last clear afternoons, sunlight came through the south window of her cottage and lit the quilt across her lap, and Wren sat in the chair beside the bed, knees nearly touching the wheelchair. "She built this for you," Mabel said, her voice thin but steady. "But she meant it through you. You understand the difference." "I think so," Wren said. "You will," Mabel said. "She didn't need someone to inherit a place, child. She had a place. She needed someone to inherit the doing of it. The standing in the kitchen at 5 in the morning with the kettle on, the knock at cottage 7, the walk back from the creek at 3 in the morning, carrying somebody else's grandmother home. That's what she left you. It can't be sold, and it can't be split. That's the only inheritance worth a damn. Wren did not trust herself to speak. My husband, Mabel went on after a moment, I haven't seen him in 35 years. I expect I'll see him soon enough. Don't make a fuss when I go. Don't let anyone wear black who doesn't naturally own black. Bury me on the hill behind the chapel, where she said she'd bury herself. We always argued about which of us was joking. Turns out neither one of us was. Yes, ma'am, Wren said. Mabel. Mabel closed her eyes and smiled. Good girl, she said. She died 3 weeks later on a Wednesday morning, just after 4:30, with Selena's hand resting on her wrist and Wren in the chair beside the bed, Juniper lying on the rag rug at her feet. The aide had stepped out only a moment earlier. The wind outside had gone still. The lamp across the green in the porch house burned steadily through it all. They buried her on the hill behind the chapel beside a stone for the husband she had spoken of and the newer, smaller stone Cordelia had ordered for Eleanor 2 months before. Mabel's grave became the third in the row. The widow from Cottage 8 read the same poem about a winter garden that she had read at Wren's very first dinner on the property, the one about a garden that is not dead but only waiting. The retired nun played the violin and made it bearable through nothing but stubbornness and love. Earl stood at the back of the small crowd with his hat off and his head bowed. Vesta brought sandwiches. Mrs. Okonkwo, on a good morning, held Selena's son in her lap through the whole reading without once looking away from the hill. After everyone else had gone back down, Wren stayed at the grave alone. She took the dollar bill from her wallet, where it still rested behind her library card, folded it once, and tucked it gently into the seam where the marble of Mabel's headstone met the earth. Thank you, she said quietly, for the porch, for my grandmother, for sitting on that porch 7 decades, waiting for the right people to finally walk up the steps. Juniper leaned her weight against Wren's leg. Wren rested her hand on the dog's head and stood there a long while without saying anything else. The cold forge behind her down the hill, its chimney finally smoking again after all those silent years, and the 90 days she had left to save the only home she had ever truly chosen for herself, ticking steadily forward, somewhere out past the tree line, like a clock that had only just begun keeping time. The legal notice arrived on a Tuesday in a plain envelope with the county courthouse seal in the corner, 3 weeks after Mabel's funeral. Cordelia drove up within the hour of Wren's phone call, her face set in a way Wren had not seen before, not on the morning of the will reading, not even on the day they found the mortgage. He filed it, Cordelia said, laying the papers on the porch house table, a formal petition challenging the will. Diminished capacity, undue influence by an attorney with a, quote, irregular and undisclosed relationship to the testator. He's asking the court to void the trust and revert the entire estate to intestate succession, which would split everything between him as the surviving child. What does that mean for the cottages? Selena asked. It means if he wins, the property gets sold within the year to satisfy the estate, regardless of who's living on it, Cordelia said. There is no provision in intestate law for 10 elderly tenants with nowhere else to go. The hearing was set for 6 weeks out in the county courthouse, a squat limestone building 2 towns over that Wren had passed 100 times without ever once imagining she would need to walk into it as anything other than a stranger. Cordelia spent those 6 weeks the way she had spent the drive north on that first morning, calm and unhurried, gathering everything that mattered and laying it out where it could not be argued with. She brought in the 3 physicians who had assessed Eleanor over her final years, 2 of them in person, 1 by deposition, each willing to testify that Eleanor's mind had remained sharp and clear through every visit, that her decisions about the trust had been made with full understanding of their consequences. She brought bank records showing the trust's improving financial picture, the grant moving toward approval, the farm store's growing revenue, the small but steady stream of donations following the newspaper story. She brought the original notebook from the forge, the one with Eleanor's note in the back, as evidence of a woman who had spent decades quietly building something with intention, not confusion. Tobias asked to testify. Cordelia was hesitant at first, worried his history with alcohol might be used against the very case they were building, but in the end she let him speak. On the stand, in a borrowed jacket that did not quite fit him, He told the courtroom about the man who had arrived at the gate 3 months earlier, certain his mother had been cheated of her inheritance, and the man he had become since, sober now 4 months, sitting at a kitchen table most evenings reading grant paperwork instead of bottles. She wasn't confused, Tobias said, his voice steady in a way it rarely had been before. She just stopped trusting people who only saw a balance sheet when they looked at her. I was one of those people. I'm not anymore. That's not proof of anything in a courtroom. But it's the truth, and I figured somebody ought to say it out loud. Dale's attorney pressed hard on Cordelia's relationship with Eleanor, calling it irregular, suggesting undue influence, suggesting a woman who had managed Eleanor's secret affairs for decades might have shaped the will to her own benefit. Cordelia answered every question without raising her voice, without once looking away from the man asking them, and when she was finally asked directly whether she had personally gained anything from the trust she had helped create, she said only, "I have never taken a fee from the Cobalt Hollow Trust in 40 years, and the financial records will confirm that." And then she said nothing further and let the silence do the rest. The judge took 3 days to rule. When the decision came, it was 4 pages long and left no room for appeal. The will stood. The trust stood. Dale's petition was dismissed in full, the judge noting in the final paragraph that the consistent, well-documented, and repeatedly verified intent of the testator across more than a decade represented, in her words, exactly the kind of careful planning the court exists to protect, not undo. Dale was not in the courtroom when the ruling was read. He had stopped attending the hearings after the second day, leaving the fight entirely to his attorney, and by the time the decision came down, Wren learned later, he had already sold the farmhouse on Linden Road to cover the legal fees and the debts that had been quietly accumulating since the divorce. She did not call him. She waited. The grant came through 4 weeks after the ruling, $240,000 over 3 years, restricted to operations. With reporting requirements Tobias said he could manage in his sleep. The same week, Cordelia successfully negotiated the mortgage with the bank now holding the note, using the improved financial picture, the grant award letter, and the steady growth of the farm store and forage sales as leverage. The balloon payment was restructured into a 10-year amortized loan at half the original interest rate, a number Selena wrote on the kitchen chalkboard in careful letters and underlined twice. It was Wren who found the second letter, on a rainy afternoon in early autumn, nearly 7 months after she had first walked up the porch steps with a dollar bill folded behind her library card. She had gone to the forge to bank the coals for the night and found behind a loose stone in the hearth wall she had never noticed before, a small metal box, rusted at the corners, that did not match the tin box holding her great-grandfather's notebook. Inside was a single envelope, the paper gone soft and slightly damp despite the dry stone around it, sealed with the same red wax, pressed with the same capital E. Wren sat on the workbench stool with the fire banked low and orange behind her and broke the seal with hands that were not entirely steady. "My darling girl," the letter began, "if it has taken you this long to find this, then you have already done the harder work, and I am glad of it, because the harder work was never meant to wait on me. I am writing this in the spring before I got sick, sitting where you are sitting now, because I could not bring myself to put it in the first letter without you misunderstanding everything that came after. I needed you to walk into that house not knowing there was a second secret waiting, or you would have spent every day here looking for it instead of doing the work it actually required. The truth is this. I was not cold to you in those last years because I didn't trust you. I was cold to protect you. Dale watches everyone he believes might someday have something he wants, and I knew, long before you did, that you would someday have this. If he had seen warmth between us in those final years, he would have moved against you long before you were ready, the way he moved against me the moment he smelled the money from this forge. I let him believe I had grown distant and difficult so that he would underestimate exactly what was waiting for you and exactly what you were capable of carrying. You were never a test I doubted. You were a girl I was protecting from a fight I had already been fighting for 40 years. The mortgage, if you have found it by now, was not foolishness. It was a bet I made on you before I had even told you anything. A bet that you would find your way to the truth before the note came due. The same way I always found my way back to this fire when the rest of my life felt like it was falling through my hands. I am sorry for the fear it must have caused you. I was not sorry enough, at the time, to leave it undone. There is one more thing. The notebook in the tin box is not the only inheritance from this room. Look beneath the third floorboard from the window, the one that has always creaked. Your great-grandfather built a small compartment there in 1953, the same year he built this forge, for exactly the kind of moment we are in now. I love you. I have always loved you in every version of myself you ever got to see. Even the cold one, especially the cold one, because that was the version doing the most to keep you safe. Trust her. I have always meant you. It was signed again with a single capital E. Wren knelt at the third floorboard from the window with her hands shaking and pried it up with the edge of a chisel from the wall of tools. Beneath it sat a small lockbox, and inside that, wrapped in wax cloth, a stack of silver dollars from decades past, a deed to an additional 60 acres adjoining the property that had never been folded into the trust's official records, and a final folded note in Eleanor's hand that read simply, "For whatever comes next that I could not see coming, use it well." She did not tell Dale about this either, not at first. She told Cordelia, who wept for the first time Wren had ever seen, briefly and without apology, at the kitchen table. Dale called in November, sober, his voice quiet in a way it had never been before in Wren's lifetime. He was living in a small apartment 2 towns from where the farmhouse used to stand, working a job at a hardware store that paid less in a month than he used to make in a week. And he asked, for the first time in his life, not for anything, but only whether he could come up and see the place once more before winter made the roads difficult. Wren picked him up at the bottom of the drive herself, the gravel crunching under her boots in a way that no longer felt unfamiliar. He walked the property slowly, the way a man walks somewhere he is seeing for the first time rather than appraising, and stopped longest at the forge, watching the coals glow through the open door. "I used to think this place was worth what it could be sold for," he said. "And now," Wren asked. "Now I think I was the only person here who never understood what it was actually worth," he said. He looked at her. "I'd like to stay if there's still a cottage, not as your uncle asking for charity, as somebody willing to split firewood and mean it." "Cottage 4's been waiting," Wren said. "Tobias has been hoping you'd come." By the following spring, Dale was splitting that firewood most mornings beside his son, the two of them rebuilding something neither of them had words for yet, but both of them showed up for every single day without being asked twice. Tobias passed his 1-year sober mark in March, the same week the farm store's spring weekend take crossed $2,000 for the first time, and the same week the forge shipped its largest single order yet, a dozen hand-forged kitchen knives for a restaurant 2 states away that had read about Cobalt Hollow in a food magazine reprint of the original newspaper story. He moved out of Cottage 4 that summer, not far, only into Cottage 11 beside Selena, the two of them having built something quiet and steady over the better part of a year that neither of them rushed to name out loud. On the morning of the 1-year anniversary of Eleanor's death, Wren woke before dawn in her grandmother's bed, Juniper at the foot of it, gray at the muzzle now, breathing slow and even. The cottage was cold. The wood stove had burned down to embers. Wren pulled on the wool sweater that had been her grandmother's, the navy one with the leather buttons, and put the kettle on and stood at the window watching the valley turn from gray to pink, the same way she had nearly every morning for a year. A car came up the gravel drive at the bottom of the hill, a small sedan she did not recognize. Selena came out of Cottage 11 in her parka and waved up the path. Wren raised her coffee mug in answer. The sedan stopped at the gate. The driver got out and helped an elderly woman from the passenger seat, small, white-haired, holding a paper bag against her chest, the way a person holds the only thing they have left worth protecting. Wren stepped out onto the porch in her sweater and boots, coffee in hand. The morning air was sharp and clean. Juniper came to her heel from wherever she had wandered. From Cottage 5, the violin had not yet started its slow daily climb toward an old hymn. The chapel bell was about to ring. Lamps were coming on across the green one by one. There was no speech ready. There never had been, not for any of it. The plan, the only plan that had ever mattered, was simple, and it was the same plan her grandmother had followed for 40 years before her. Go down the steps, cross the gravel, put out a hand, say a name, lead the stranger inside, sit her by the wood stove, bring coffee and bread and honey, and listen. On the kitchen counter behind her sat her wallet, open from the night before. Where the dollar bill had rested for a year was now a small index card in Mabel's careful handwriting, a recipe for cornbread, cornmeal, and buttermilk, and an egg and a stick of butter. and beneath it, in the same hand, a sentence Mabel had written there long before Wren ever arrived, for nobody in particular, waiting all that time for someone to need it. Family is who answers the door when it knocks. The rest is just relatives. Wren took a sip of her coffee. The chapel bell rang once, clear across the valley. The woman at the gate looked up at the sound and met Wren's eyes from across the green. Wren raised her hand. Then she walked down the steps, juniper at her heel, across the gravel, through the soft pink light of a morning that belonged to no one but the people who showed up for it, to answer the door.